Thomas Keller lived a life of harsh solitude until a pregnant woman appeared on his remote ranch, only to reveal she was his long-lost sister Sarah, a secret he had buried deep. The pain and betrayal between them ran deep, fueled by years of silence and unforgiven wounds that threatened to tear them apart once again. But when fate forced Thomas to face his past and stand by Sarah during her hardest hour, everything changed in a way no one expected. Just wait until you hear how this tense reunion unfolds and why, in the end, justice of the heart triumphs over years of pain and anger. Deep in the rugged wilderness of Idaho, far from the hum of cities and the buzz of modern life, stood a lone ranch nestled among towering pines and jagged mountain peaks. This was the world of Thomas Keller, a man shaped by the untamed land he called home. His hands were calloused from years of hard labor, splitting wood and tracking game. He spoke little, choosing instead to let the silence of the mountains fill the spaces between his words. Thomas was the kind of man who lived by a strict code, a code of fairness, endurance, and self-reliance. His ranch was isolated. The nearest town was hours away by rough dirt roads, and the forest surrounding his property seemed endless. Despite the solitude, Thomas had always found comfort in his routine, waking before dawn, working until sunset, and resting under the vast starry sky. But recently, everything had changed. A few weeks earlier, while clearing fallen trees after a storm, Thomas had slipped and injured his leg badly enough that he could no longer keep up with the demands of the ranch alone. More pressing, however, was the news he had received quietly but firmly. He was going to be a father. The realization struck him harder than any injury. For all his strength, Thomas knew he couldn't face the future without help. With a mixture of reluctance and necessity, he took a rare trip down the mountain to the nearest town. There he posted an ad in the general store, a simple request for a cook to come live on the ranch, someone who could help him through the coming months and beyond. Days passed slowly until one afternoon a dusty pickup truck rumbled down the mountain road and stopped at his gate. She stepped out, a young woman clearly in the final stages of pregnancy. Her steps were steady, her gaze steady and calm like a quiet river. She introduced herself as Marla. Thomas noticed her hands, not soft or fragile, but strong and sure, capable of facing the harshness of mountain life. He was surprised by her confidence and the peacefulness she carried, as if she had made a choice to face whatever lay ahead with quiet strength. The first evening was quiet but tense. Thomas watched her move around the kitchen, chopping wood for the stove, unpacking simple belongings. They spoke little, but Thomas felt an inexplicable weight settle in the room, as though something unspoken hung between them. Finally, as they sat by the fire with the wind howling outside, Thomas asked her quietly, "What's your real name, Marla?" She looked up, eyes steady but with a flicker of something deeper, and said softly, "Thomas, do you not recognize me? It's Sarah, your sister." The room seemed to freeze. Thomas's breath caught in his throat. The name was a ghost, buried deep in his heart, locked away behind years of silence and pain. Sarah, a person he thought he'd lost forever. His face went pale, and for a long moment neither of them spoke. Outside, the cold night pressed in, but inside the small cabin, a storm of memories and emotions had just begun to break. The firelight flickered against the rough wooden walls, casting long shadows in the quiet cabin. Outside, the wind continued to whistle through the pine trees, but inside, a far more turbulent storm was brewing, one of memories, regrets, and unspoken truths. Marla, or rather Sarah, took a deep breath and began to speak. Her voice was steady, but carried the weight of years spent locked away in silence. "Thomas," she said quietly, "I left because I couldn't stay. After what happened to Mom and Dad, after everything fell apart, I blamed you. I thought you didn't care, that you'd abandoned us. I was angry, hurt. I couldn't face the truth. So I changed my name, disappeared. I needed to protect myself." Her eyes, shining with a mix of sorrow and determination, met his. "I've carried that pain with me every day, but now, with this child growing inside me, I need a fresh start. I need you." Thomas sat back, the weight of her words crashing down on him. For a long time, all he could feel was a fierce, burning hatred, not directed at Sarah, but at himself. Hatred for the mistakes he believed he had made. Hatred for the silence that had torn their family apart. Hatred for the years lost and the distance grown between them. But beneath that anger was a tangled web of guilt. Guilt that gnawed at his pride and threatened to crush the fragile hope he had clung to in the loneliness of the mountains. How could he forgive himself? And how could he forgive her for leaving? The truth was heavier than either of them had expected. Thomas wanted to push her away, to shield himself from the flood of emotions and memories that threatened to overwhelm him. But he also knew, deep down, that he couldn't abandon her now, especially not with a child on the way. Their conversation grew heated, a collision of years of hurt and frustration. Words were spoken in bursts, anger mixed with pain, fear tangled with hope. Old wounds reopened, raw and aching, while new questions demanded answers. Could they find a way past the bitterness? Could forgiveness take root where resentment had thrived for so long? Or would the ghosts of the past consume them both? As the night deepened, Thomas and Sarah faced their most difficult challenge yet, confronting the pain that had defined their lives and deciding whether it could be the foundation for a new beginning. The storm howled outside like an angry beast, battering the old wooden walls of the mountain ranch. Thunder shook the earth, and sheets of rain blurred the narrow windows. Inside, the atmosphere was just as turbulent, but this storm was made of words, memories, and buried pain. That night, Sarah went into labor unexpectedly early. The rugged isolation that once felt like freedom now seemed like a trap. Thomas, despite the years of anger and bitterness simmering between them, took charge without hesitation. There was no time for old grudges when a life was about to begin. Between contractions and urgent preparations, their conversations ignited like sparks in dry tinder. Voices rose and fell, fierce, raw, and aching. Sarah's words carried years of unanswered questions and frustration, while Thomas struggled to express the guilt and regret that had consumed him. The air was thick with anger, but beneath it lay a desperate longing to be understood. Amid the chaos, Sarah stumbled upon a dusty box tucked away on a high shelf. filled with old letters and diaries Thomas had written during those long years of solitude. Hesitant but curious, she began to read. The pages revealed confessions Thomas had never shared, his regrets, his fears, and his own heartache over their fractured family. Each sentence peeled back a layer of misunderstanding. Slowly, the blame that Sarah had carried alone began to shift. It wasn't her fault. It was his pride, his fear of vulnerability, that had driven them apart. That realization burned through Thomas like fire, igniting a new kind of anger. Anger at himself for losing what truly mattered, and anger at the cruel circumstances that had forced them into silence. But this anger was different. It was not destructive. It was a catalyst. It pushed them both toward something they hadn't dared hope for, a chance to rebuild. As the storm outside began to wane, so did the storm within. Together, Thomas and Sarah took the first tentative steps toward healing. He was no longer just the distant rancher. He became a protector, a partner, a guardian not only for Sarah, but for the new life growing inside her. The ranch, once a place of isolation and secrets, began to transform. It became a home where truth could be spoken, where anger could be faced honestly, and where trust could slowly, painfully grow. The first light of dawn spilled gently over the rugged peaks surrounding the ranch, casting a soft glow through the windows of the modest cabin. Inside, the air was filled not with the cold silence of isolation, but with quiet breaths and tender whispers. The baby had arrived, healthy, strong, and full of life. In that moment, something shifted deep within Thomas Keller. For the first time in many years, his worn face softened into a genuine smile. A smile born not of relief alone, but of something far greater. A profound sense of justice finally restored. This was no justice born from harshness or bitterness, but a justice of the heart, one that healed old wounds rather than deepening them. It was the justice that comes when truth is faced with courage, when forgiveness is chosen over resentment, and when broken ties are lovingly mended. Sarah was no longer the mysterious stranger who had walked into his life during a storm. She was family, his sister, the woman who carried not only a child, but also the shared history of pain, hope, and now renewal. Thomas felt himself opening up, not just to Sarah and the newborn son cradled in her arms, but to the world outside the mountains he had long hidden from. He embraced the pain of his past, acknowledged the mistakes and regrets that had once weighed him down, and finally let go. In their place rose new meaning and hope, like the morning sun casting away the shadows of night. Their relationship, once tangled in anger and silence, blossomed into something fragile yet strong. Love and support built on honesty and understanding. They were no longer two people divided by years of silence, but a family bound together by resilience and newfound trust. The mountains, once a fortress of solitude for Thomas, now felt like home, a place where life would be lived not in loneliness, but in connection. The ranch, with its weathered walls and endless horizons, stood as a symbol of a
had rebuilt.